Perfect. And we'll refer back to that here in a second, but this is the second meeting of the Pacific Tower Campus working group as part of the Department of Commerce and PHPDA's work to produce a programming plan for the Pacific Tower Campus to be responsive to needs and sort of vision for program services, et cetera, for youth and young adults experiencing homelessness. This is our second meeting. We met a couple of weeks ago, and that was very much sort of an introduction and sort of expectations. Today, we'll do a little bit of recap on what we talked about last and get folks either caught up to speed if you didn't participate in that first conversation, and then dive into our focus area for today. I'm going to share, where is it? It's that one, I think. Let's see. All right, can folks see the slide? Okay, awesome. I think I'm sharing my whole other monitor, so hopefully that's not like weird. Let me move this down too. Maybe I can't. All right, it is what it is. Let's skip ahead. There we go. So we'll do a little bit of welcome and an intro, like I was saying, overview of ground rules. We talked about this last time we were together. Sounds like everyone was on board with our expectations for how we're participating in this conversation, and then do a little bit of that recap and then dive into the conversation around housing and program models. So really briefly, my name is Ishmael Nunez. I use he and him pronouns. I am with BDS Planning and Urban Design. I'm joined by one of my colleagues here today and another on our team that's not here with us on this conversation today. We are the facilitation team for this programming process and of this work group. We are working in support or in collaboration with North Star Advocates, Jim Theophilus and Aaron Hathaway on the call to ultimately produce this report for the Department of Commerce. Our responsibility is the facilitation of this process in these meetings and the production of the report based on the input that comes out of this work. I acknowledged this the last time around. I feel very competent as a facilitator, but there's a lot more people in this room that know a lot more about the content, including Jim, including Aaron, including Melody and others. And so I will definitely be looking to folks to be active participants in the conversation and bringing in their expertise and what they know. Real quick, just sort of tech thing. If you'd like us to refer to you, if we're referring to folks' name as we see them on the screen, if you'd like that to be different than what's currently there, if you're on a computer at least, if you hover over your image and go up to the right-hand corner, you'll see a couple of dots pull up as a menu. If you click those dots, a drop-down menu will come out with an option to rename yourself in case you'd like us to call you something that is different than what is on the screen. Or if you'd like to add pronouns, for example. I'm realizing now that I'm going to do the same thing in a moment because this is the webinar format. And so it has a different name for me. So I will model that in a second. Okay. Let's see if we're going ahead here. Computer is thinking. I think I know what's coming up next. Yeah. So on that same note, this is a meeting of this PAC Tower working group, which is kind of an amalgamation of several folks that are both providers, but also particularly young folks with lived experience. The aim is to prioritize the engagement of these invitees. There's several folks on this call that are, let's call it institutional or part of the project team that are part of the conversation to be part of the different steps of this process. But what we're asking and inviting folks to do is that if you are sort of within one of these invitees, particularly as a provider or a person with lived experiences, we'd love to have you sort of at the forefront of the engagement. I will do my best. Our facilitation team will do our best to make sure that you are have the opportunities to participate in the conversation as you'd like. And then we'll ask that other staffs or guests, whether non-visible or not, as far as your camera, sort of take a back seat to the conversation. As mentioned at the top of this meeting is being recorded. The recorded meetings are used only for our internal team and to share out with folks in advance of the subsequent meetings to make sure that they're sort of staying in the loop. It's not being, let's call it, widely distributed. And so if you wish to not be on video because of the recording, then you can turn your camera off. But I will encourage folks to keep their cameras on if they're comfortable with being recorded so that we can be part of the conversation. So hopefully that works with people. And then finally, I just want to take an opportunity to remind folks of sort of these group norms or guidelines or expectations that we chatted about last time, and I got a bunch of thumbs up, so we won't spend a lot of time seeing if there's anything additional, but essentially 3 major pieces here that we want to encourage. One is participation, active participation, especially on Zoom. As I was just talking about it, I really want to encourage people to active participants, unmute, jump into the conversation. If you want to speak and wave a hand, do that. Use your body language. It's really helpful to know that you're engaged and that you're listening and participating. I know that it's a lot to be on a Zoom meeting, but it's really helpful, particularly for the facilitation. We are inviting folks to be participants and particularly speaking from their own lived experiences. And as we talked about in the first meeting, understanding that those lived experiences might be the result of sort of failures, let's call them, failed systems, harmful experiences, things that we don't want to replicate, and also bringing that towards a conversation around how can we sort of gear towards moving towards some sort of shared outcomes. We invite and sort of ask folks to maintain this as a safe space. That means we have to be active participants in doing that, meaning that we're respecting, validating, acknowledging folks, particularly for those lived experiences, and doing our part to ensure that folks' vulnerability is respected and protected in case there's conversations that are personal, or unless there's sentiments that are relatively personal. And then finally, everyone's voice counts. We really want to emphasize voices and experiences from those with lived experience, from young people. And so we'll do, like I said, we'll do our part in doing that, but otherwise just participate in a sort of respectful manner. So hopefully that is all familiar. And if it's your first time seeing it, hopefully that's all agreeable. Okay, so we want to take a brief moment here to do a little bit of a recap of where we are so far, both in the project and the timeline of the project. And then I'll invite Melody to speak a little bit around bringing forward what we heard in the last meeting that we were all convened, and some of the things that folks asked for, and just helping us come up to speed with what happened in the last meeting. So as I mentioned at the top of this, we are required, our charge is to develop a program plan for utilization of the quarters buildings. We're referencing the Pacific Tower campus in Seattle and King County. And we'll talk, actually, Melody will reference this very soon. The campus is currently, let's call it, home to a variety of different providers and services in health and social services for homelessness or otherwise, and some other institutions like the Department of Commerce, et cetera. And there is an opportunity for a number of the quarters buildings, as we're referring to them, which is the campus formerly being a medical facility and where medical staff lived, for those quarter buildings to serve as youth and young adults experiencing homelessness. So the conversations that we're having in this project are around housing program models. That'll be today's focus. the service arrays. Folks were asking, what are the current proximate services to the campus? What are the other things on the campus right now? And then ultimately an estimates of operation costs. These are all the things that are going to be put together in a set of recommendations to Commerce and the legislature, and for onward to next steps for getting the capital and operational investments needed to implement. So we've talked about this a little bit, that this conversation is an opportunity to really put forth what is needed, really put forth what would like to be envisioned. There's a couple of steps that then need to happen before where there's solid clarity around what can be implemented and what will happen with these buildings. But this is a big opportunity, particularly in going towards the legislature, to be sort of an advocacy for what folks think these buildings should be and what they should do. As I mentioned, this is essentially an illustration of what I was just describing. We are in this program process, ultimately working towards recommendations to the legislature for this housing and services program plan. We are meeting 4 times on this bi-weekly schedule. This is our second time. Our next meeting will be on the October 13th and then October 27th. And by then I need to have my Halloween costume picked out, or else it's going to be too late for sure. So maybe I'll add that as a graph as a reminder. Coinciding with this programming process is an operations team. These are the folks that are really looking at the building itself, the architecture, many of the institutional players in this process. This is that programming process, and where we are today is this housing program and models. Very briefly before moving on to the recap, any questions, clarification around what the purpose of the group is, what the purpose of the conversations are? We'll set up the discussion in a little bit, but any questions about what this is, what's trying to be accomplished, what the process looks like? Thank you, Emily. So yeah, love, like, on camera to shake your head no is very helpful. Thank you. Good, thumbs up. All right, great. So with that, want to do a brief recap of what we talked about last time and what are some of the things that came up last time. And so I will invite Melody from our team, and maybe you want to introduce yourself. I didn't actually explicitly give you the opportunity to do that earlier. I'm sorry.
No, that's okay.
Go through this.
Yeah, thanks, Ishmael. Hi, everyone. Good to see some of you again, and good to see some of you for the first time. My name is Melody Garcia. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm the Community Health and Safety Lead Consultant at BDS Planning. Happy to be in this process with you all, helping to co-facilitate and capture notes, and here to help solve any tech issues you have as well. Last time we convened, we had a really good, robust discussion with the folks on the call about, and you'll see in the slide presentation, the actual physical discussion that we captured. So we asked 3 kind of high-level questions, one being, what are the major gaps in system to end homelessness for youth and young adults? And folks generated really great answers. Overemphasis on the most vulnerable, developmentally age-appropriate programs needed, lack of institutional and provider coordination, lack of communication and awareness, lack of access to dental care, and lack of access to physical spaces to go after being released from an institution. And we also asked then, how could this Pack Tower campus opportunity meaningfully serve to reduce and end youth homelessness? And we spoke about, again, wanting that developmentally and culturally appropriate service provision, having private space for telehealth and other services, appropriately funded on-campus job training, legal advocacy, tenancy support, green space, connection to nature, etc. And then the last question, was what do we, the group, need to be set up for a successful process? And I think, folks are really interested in what Pack Tower currently has going on. And so we have sent in advance the list that we got from, and thank you, John Kim, from the PHPDA for sending that, a list of kind of overview of programs and services. And as Ishmael said, largely, healthcare or youth, young adult homelessness programs, advocacy programs, and then some institutional partners as well, such as the Department of Commerce and DSHS. Levi, I don't know if you wanted to speak to some of the proximate services around the buildings as well.
Yeah. Let me share my screen here. Hopefully this is, oh, since you cannot share, well, the other participant is sharing. I can also just, okay. Let's try this again. Screen. There you go. Hopefully everybody's seeing this map here. So I'll follow up with this as well so that everybody can see this. I can send this to you, Ishmael, and you can send it out. But we compiled just a brief list of about 10 sort of residential community services that are around the center, but we're located here up on the hill. We've got AI Pace, which is planned to go in on the north end of the lot. We also noted some bus access here.
Can you let us know what AI Pace is?
That I can't, because I am not that's I wish we had Katie Saunders on. John, do you have a good summary?
AI PACE is essentially a day program for seniors, and it's supporting seniors that want to age in place, and it offers opportunities for them to receive a whole host of services from fairly robust healthcare services as well as other support services. Currently, AI PACE is still in negotiation with the developer of the nearly 200 units of affordable housing that are going to be going onto the north lot. AI PACE was slated to be a tenant alongside childcare facility that is going to be hosted by El Centro de la Raza.
Thank you.
Thanks, John. And I might have to call on you again here as we go through, but to the north of the site, we have the Seattle Indian Health Board. We've got the Goodwill Worker Training. We also have the Navigation Center and 501 Rainier Supportive Housing, all of that kind of located here in Little Saigon. And then to the south, we get a couple other services. We have Recovery Place, which I believe is run by Valley Cities, and the Hobson Place. And then 5 and 6 here, that's Wellspring Family Services and Treehouse. And then El Centro de la Raza has a location quite a few miles away. But John, correct me if I'm wrong, doesn't El Centro also have services, or do they just have offices in the tower?
They're primarily offices,
Okay.
but there are, they've got programs inside as well. And also to come, things like Seattle Jazz Ed are planning to be on Beacon Hill. And, one of the things that came out in the conversation last time was that serving the whole of youth with services includes things beyond just like oral and oral health and mental health, but also things like access to art and creative programs and those types of things as well.
And then in addition to services, we've also just on this map highlighted, local amenities. These are kind of the closest location where you would find groceries along Rainier, and then north in Little Saigon. We have a couple of elementary and middle schools located around the site. Where's my scale? I have a good scale on here, so I'm not sure how many miles away that is. And then streetcar access to the north. And really the site in terms of circulation and where we see people accessing services from this location, they tend to cross the bridge into Little Saigon. That tends to be sort of the heaviest trafficked area. Give you back your screen. Thanks.
Thanks, Levi. I'll just say briefly as to pull that all together. So in the last meeting, when we're talking about services, we're talking about programs. Folks wanted to know what was, as Melody said, currently in the tower, and also what is nearby, and how accessible are those services. So thank you, Levi, for sharing that. And I would say send it to Aaron Hathaway, because Aaron can put it into the next packet when the meetings go out. So appreciate you for doing that. Okay, let's pull this one back up. So yeah, one other thing to add on top of Melody's update is between the last meeting and this meeting, there was also a particular space carved out for a conversation with young folks with lived experiences, And my understanding, I was not present in that meeting, Mile Tang from our team was that there was, it sounded like a positive thing to hold that space in particular. And again, we want to make sure that we're emphasizing those voices. I'm not sure I'll invite, but there is no obligation. If there were folks that were on that call that wanted to share out anything that they like to the rest of the group to know that was either covered or anything about how that conversation went. And I'm not sure entirely if there's folks that were on that conversation that are also here, but I'll take a moment in case anyone wants to share anything.
Yeah, I'll just say that Mile and I were honored to be able to be in that conversation with young people. I see several of them here today, and I think they may want to chime in now, or they may want to do it as the discussion unfolds, but they had some really awesome ideas that I do encourage them to share when they feel comfortable.
And I'll say again, I want to acknowledge that, yeah, I'm encouraging folks for active participation. Zoom is not the best way for us to do that. So Melody, you shared a little bit earlier as well. If you know you want to join the conversation first through the chat and then be pulled into the conversation verbally, please do so that way. Don't want to sort of have it feel like a high pressure thing to participate, but otherwise folks should feel encouraged and supported to jump in. One other thing that I wanted to actually underscore from the takeaway as well, or Melody, from the last meeting that we talked about was actually two other things. One is the idea, and maybe this also came up in the conversation between last meeting and this one with young folks, of services being geared towards, and I think it was you, Jim, that used this word, geared towards enrichment, in addition to treatment, in addition to and sort of that part of the idea of sort of well-being and thriving and longevity is both the sort of addressing of, let's call them immediate needs or critical needs, and also what is important to sort of a whole and full life. And so I think as we're having that conversation today, I want to pose that. It'll come up actually in a little bit on another slide to remind folks to think about that balance of what do we know either from folks with lived experience or from the work that providers do around both treatments, services, attention needed, and also some of these enrichment fuller lives. Melody mentioned a little bit about like access to green space, came up in that last meeting. And we can start to get creative in what kind of program models or services get included into Pacific Tower when you start thinking of other examples like community kitchens, game rooms, etc. So just an acknowledgement of that. And then the other thing that I wanted to add was obviously, as Levi was just showing us on the images there, this is a campus, which is an important thing that we made sure to underscore in our last meeting. It's not just a series of buildings or like a single building, it's a campus. And still it is located, in that site Levi just showed us in Seattle, just there south of I-90, on Beacon Hill, proximity to Little Saigon. But how can it be how could it serve sort of like the region or the state? And one of the things that came up last meeting as well was sort of this idea of a hub. And perhaps there are particular services, perhaps there are particular opportunities there that really is sort of the hub either for the region or the state for folks, particularly young folks from other places that can find themselves there because of something specific, specific service that are there, opportunities. So I think that it's an important thing to be mindful of as well as we're doing that touching base. Anything else that folks want to elevate that either participated in the last meeting or just in reaction to what's on the screen or what you've just heard? Yeah, go ahead, Emily.
Hi there. So this is something that, and it's more just like wanting to know about existing tenants slash use case, well, not use cases, but cases. And so I live in a youth and young adult housing program. It's more like an apartment building, but it's a Victorian style house that was transformed into 6 units, all for 18 to 21 year olds. 18 to 24. I was right the first time. And basically at first, I kind of volunteered to be an RA, like a resident advocate. It's not really advisor because advisor felt weird. I was on the same level. I'm a little bit older I'm on the older end, but I didn't feel like that was an appropriate thing. So having someone there that was like, okay, I know you have like all these caseworkers and like, I'm not there for that. I'm here for peer support. Like, if you're feeling not heard or not seen, I can advocate for you in that way. I can help you with share my experiences with learning things, just like things like that, making sure that, kind of like a buffer in between landlord and like the other tenants, and just kind of like making sure that the tenants are doing what they're supposed to be doing, but also landlords giving them that space and like making sure they're being respected, the residents are being respected. And so I guess something like that might be fun to dabble with, because now it's a position that I'm actually getting paid for. The landlord found and program director found the importance in that. So that was just an idea.
Thank you, Emily. Yeah, that's a great idea. And I like that title or that role, a paid resident advocate and buffer, like you said, between the residents and the other campus services. And we're talking about how the campus sort of services interact with each other. So that's an interesting way to help facilitate that.
Yeah, it's kind of cool. And it would be a very unique situation because I was fortunate enough to have the lived experience and also be working in the housing, field and social services field. And so just having the resources that I could connect to them and to clients and being on site, that's one thing that is there. Like if they're having a crisis late night, I am getting certified right now. I can't do it, but I'm getting peer certified. So maybe like a certified peer counselor in that role potentially, so that there's hours they can set aside and schedule and all that. But there's lots to go into that, but just the general idea of that.
Great. Thank you, Emily. And I'm confident that Melody, you're taking these notes, and we'll pull them back up in a little bit when we get into the rest of the discussion. So I appreciate that. I saw Pink, you have a hand up, and then Mayuna, I know you shared some things in the chat, and I don't know if you wanted to speak about them or I can read them on your behalf, but Pink, why don't you go first before we do that?
I was just going to bring on to Mayana's point and also my own point, but for Mayana's point, I also think having some sort of mental health there would be great, like mental health service, just because a lot of the times with the mental health services that are available, it feels like they're just trying to push you out. Like they're bringing you in, trying to look for fast what I like to call band-aid solutions and then pushing you out of the system. And then the other thing that was brought up in the meeting that we had with people with lived experience was childcare for young parents. Having some sort of childcare that's either free or very cheap for people that live there would be really great, since that's a huge barrier for a lot of people.
Great, thank you, Pink. So yeah, mental health services that otherwise folks are pushed out towards to need to go find, and then childcare for young parents. Mayana, you shared in the chat, I think I saw your hand up as well, and we had a couple of folks reference your point. I'm happy to read it out if you'd like, or if you want to speak to it, feel free to go ahead and unmute. And if you're speaking right now, you're still on mute, but maybe you're not. Okay, I'll read out the comment just so that we can all have it in the same space. And then Miana, if you want to jump in, please do so, because this looks like there's a couple folks supporting this. So shared that that there are several counseling organizations near the PAC Tower, but something that came up in the conversation of the people with lived experiences before this meeting was having some sort of access to mental health care at the PAC Tower, whether it's for people without access to mental health, without mental health care, such as no insurance or no funds, or even just an after-hour crisis resource for that area. Either could be either way, I think it could be a really good resource. Mayana, did you want to add anything onto that or speak any more to it? Oh, internet's not doing too well. Got it. Well, great. We've got you in the chat. Wanted to make sure that you're participating. So a couple of underlines for the healthcare. Oh no. Okay. If you're trying to speak and having audio issues, maybe you can send Melody or Aaron a message, and it might help to log off and get back on, but we can try and figure that out. Okay. Great. And yeah, a lot of folks in the chat around counseling, mental health options. So great. Appreciate that. So let's continue this right on into the discussion, and that's exactly where we're moving right now. So appreciate folks bringing in that feedback and what we heard. Okay, see you, Mayana. Chat should work as long as you're comfortable with me reading out what you're saying. Then we can do that. That works just fine. So we wanted to have this conversation around housing and program models. And actually, before I go into the conversation, I'll invite Jim to share any context that you might want to set up about this. But ultimately, and actually even Levi as well. Ultimately, the campus and the quarters buildings have some flexibility as to what they can be, or what sort of they can be home to. They can be home to actual housing or models of housing that are of particular need or particular preference. There's also space and opportunity, as we're talking about, for this sort of services array and relationship between housing and services. There's also space and opportunity for like office and office-based services or clinic services. And so the potential and sort of spectrum is there. There's some limitations as it relates to like size of buildings and what they currently have, but we're not there yet to be able to be like highly considering that in the conversation. We want to be thinking about what's important, what the needs are. So before we ask the specific question, I don't know, Jim, if you want to set up any more as it relates to context on housing and program models. I know you talked about this 24/7 and the office space, and then Levi, if you want to add anything else about the buildings themselves and what they can support.
Yeah, thanks. And I want to start by thanking everyone for being here, particularly the folks who were, well, thank you for if you were the first meeting and came back, And also those who are just joining the second meeting, because several of them that I can see are service providers, and we really, really need your input. The other thing I want to say at the top is if you want a tour, I've had one person respond, and thank you to John Kim for offering to conduct a tour. One person has said so, and so if you want one, please let me know, and I'm going to hook you up with John. But mostly, I just want to say what an awesome opportunity this is, and underscore a couple things that have been said. For example, this is located in an awesome neighborhood, an already established campus. I was grateful to be with Away Home Washington, and our offices were there. So daily went to that building to work. And then again, the overall neighborhood and location. So I want us to think about, and this came up too, is not just programs that are treatment-based and housing-based, although that's a big part of it, but also, yeah, what kind of feel and culture and enrichment activities do we want to have so that the young people that live there, again, don't feel like they're at an institution, but feel like they're in a community. So I think what we're looking for is what kind of housing models make sense. Are they, how many are 24/7 that are staffed? Emily gave a great talk at the lived experience meeting and brought it up here today about the value of peer housing, that so that it feels more comfortable to young people. And of course, it's, even though it's located in Seattle, King County, this has a statewide reach. And so what are the gaps that this could be filling statewide? And I think many of you know, one of the reasons why we contracted with BDS is not only because they're awesome facilitators, but because so that North Star could kind of be a member in the conversation, because I really do hope we can have some safe housing for young people being discharged from inpatient treatment who don't yet have a long-term place, but a soft, safe landing. But again, the enrichment programs and then the office-based sort of services. But I just think we've got just a remarkable opportunity to have some great ideas that we can go into next session and advocate for the money that we need to do the construction of the building, and then the operational services. The last thing I'll say is I just really, again, want to thank those with lived experience. And it seemed like that meeting was really helpful to them to have a safe space. And so we agreed that we will do that again. So if you're new, if you're lived experience and this is your first meeting, please email me, because I want to get you a stipend that compensates you for your time and expertise. And secondly, make sure you know about the next meeting when we'll just create a safe space for you all to talk. So think big, think creative, don't be limited by what we currently do. Let's really put forth a vision around how we can create a special environment that both houses, provides treatment, but also creative sort of healthy developmental supports at this campus as well. Thank you, Ishmael.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Jim. Yes, exactly that. I want to read out Mayana's comment, then I want to, and this might be tied to what I was going to ask Levi to speak to here a little bit, but question said, would each person get shelter housing there and each have their own room or space, or how does it work? How long can people stay there for housing? I think there's a question there around sort of time and also around sort of how the configuration. So Jim, I don't know if you want to answer part of that, and then I'm curious if Levi, you can speak a little bit to how the buildings could support different setups.
Yeah, I would say those are the exact right questions. What we want to hear is, what do you think would be helpful for young people? And we'll put all these in our recommendations as we go to the legislature. But that's why you're here. Those are the brilliant questions that we want to address.
And Levi, would you be able to share a little bit? I know you showed a little bit, and we'll go back to the other comment from you, Mayana, here in a second. I know you showed images last time of the quarters building. I don't know if you've got them up again, but if you can speak a little bit to the opportunity and sort of the range here as we're getting into this conversation here in a second.
Yeah, I'm going to share my screen one more time. I do have a second graphic here for just such an occasion. to give people just a little extra context when we're talking about these buildings, we're talking about this row of 4 buildings here, and then this really long building here. These, then we refer to these as the quarters buildings 3 through 10. So 3 of these buildings are like a duplex house. They're similar in scale. This middle one here is like a standard home. You know, some of when I think it was Emily was talking about, you know, a converted Victorian home. This is a very similar situation from what we looked at. You're looking at 6 units if you wanted to have people in individual rooms, kind of in each of those houses. And then 10 is a really unique condition. It's a much larger building. It used to be a dormitory. And really, that's only a thing to note in that it's got a lot of space. And all of these buildings are they're historic, and so the exterior of the buildings need to remain as they are and preserved and taken care of, but the interiors are fairly flexible. So all of this is just to say that really we're hoping that everybody's coming into this with an open mind about what program opportunities they are, because we'll figure out how to make it fit ultimately in the end. You know, what we're looking for is what kind of programs need to go in here, what works well when you have 5 buildings, you know, kind of this combination. What are the opportunities here? And especially the other thing to note is that there is a green space here that's absolutely magnificent. It's almost a small park. Each of these houses is sort of separated from the street. They're downstairs. They've got a little bit of privacy, and then they have sort of these front yard spaces, but they're all connected sort of in the back to one another. So there's a lot of opportunity to connect these. There's a lot of opportunity to keep them separated as needed. We're curious what people think should go in here.
Awesome. Thank you, Levi. I think that was a very helpful graphic to for folks to be able to reference. So I'm gonna share my screen and with the question here, and then I'm gonna jump back into the chat because there's a lot of really great ideas already flowing, which is awesome. So essentially, what we want folks to see if this works here. Essentially, what we want to focus on in this conversation, but there's obviously it's not restrictive. It's not super restricted. Is we're thinking about programs that would add capacity. Housing and housing program models will add capacity that meet some of those gaps and needs that we talked about a little bit earlier in that recap. Some examples are, for example, these 24/7 programs in housing that is or is not staffed. So as it relates to staff, I think that idea is great, Emily, around sort of the resident advocate. Some office-based services or clinics, legal advocacy, educational advocacy. These are just examples. There's other things that folks are talking about in particular details that I think are actually very thoughtful, which we'll talk about in a second. And then just making this point again that we're thinking about the breadth of enrichment in addition to treatment. In a moment, we'll switch over and you can see some of the live note taking that we're going to be doing here. But I wanted to already highlight and call out some of the stuff that's been in the chat, some of the commentary in the chat, because in response to these questions or tied to these questions, Mayana, you talked about if the housing can be longer term, then the folks living there have the opportunity to decorate their own space with their own style. They can feel more comfortable and at home. So I'm curious about maybe the range of options that allow young people to have the flexibility to choose how they decorate their spaces, and maybe some of that is modular. Maybe there's already decorations. Maybe there's someone that you can work with to help make that space feel your own. And to the point that you're saying, because it would go with what Jim was talking about for having a safe, comfortable environment. And then it's funny because you mentioned a small logistic detail, and I'm always like, I don't know, the thing that brings me anxiety, or the thing that I like ultimately overly focus on sometimes, are those small details where it's like lighting that isn't super bright and fluorescent for the rooms of the building. Some people are sensitive to bright lights, so having softer ones can create for a peaceful environment. Marissa, you had a great addition of like well, maybe the light switches allow you to control the brightness of the room. You say a small logistic detail, but then that's probably like a huge thing that impacts your day to day and sort of your comfortability. So I think these are great, and I want folks to continue. I see a hand up, and so let's take this off, and actually I'll switch to this screen here, where Melody is already brilliantly started to capture what folks are talking about on some of these screens. So other things that folks would like to share into the conversation, either programs or any of this level of detail. I think I saw Emily, I think you saw your hand up. Yeah, go ahead.
Part of like community supports that would be able, like that I'd love to see available. One that we've heard that my landlord's trying to get done, and one that some that she hasn't, but some cooking classes, or maybe like a class that's like, this is how much money you have, and let's go to this, like, let's figure out how you can, what you can do with that money, make a meal, make the most out of that money, make healthy meals. Because that's something I'm still struggling with, and I'm 25. Like, it's embarrassing. And so like that's a big one. And then just like just things like that, you know. Of course they're all fleeting my mind now, so never mind, but I will put them in the chat when I remember them.
That's a great idea. I know we talked a little bit in the last meeting around sort of like a community kitchen, but I think that idea of cooking classes is really great. And yeah, I can't be left alone on my own for too long to fend for myself, because it's not going to go well. Lacey, and if I'm pronouncing that incorrectly, let me know. Lacey, Lori, and then Aaron.
Oh, you're great. Okay. So this is my first meeting in this. So I'm curious. So is this is for single young people and what, parents with children? I'm just curious. Is it both? Or
Jim, how would you describe it? I know we're talking about youth and young people, but we also talked about, for example, folks that need childcare, for example. Jim, how would you describe that range?
Yeah, I would say that, and I'm not trying to be a broken record, Lacey. I think that's why we're here. It's a blank slate. What do we think? What are the gaps that we need? And so I would love you to make a recommendation about what you just said, like change it from a question to a recommendation.
okay, I recommend it be for families, young families. I have my daughter and I'm expecting another one. So, you know, just to advocate for that. And some things that I was just curious, you know, we were talking about making it feel like more at home and stuff, with like ability to decorate and choose their own things. Will there be like requirements? Like, will there be a monthly inspection that kind of feels invasive sometimes? Or will there be, do you have to meet certain requirements to stay in the program? Those are just kind of some things that maybe we can discuss.
Great. So yeah, I'm gonna pull a Jim here. So one, love that you think that it would be a huge benefit for housing for young families. And then it sounds like, I'm pulling a Jim here, that things like monthly inspections or things like some sort of requirements that you have to meet at a regular basis or high frequency will be a barrier for folks to be able to be sustained there. So that would be something that you would not recommend.
Yeah, like right now I was staying in with Friends of Youth, which is now HopeLink. I don't know what the HopeLink is going to be like, but Friends of Youth, we do a monthly inspection. And I always remember, I just know being like very stressed out, like, oh my gosh, I've got so much going on. I have my child throwing milk across the room and I have this inspection tomorrow. You know, and it can feel like kind of invasive. They come in sometimes when you're not home, they could come in. So just, you know, I understand inspections to make sure there's no like rats or whatever, but if the tenant would have a concern, they can call them and tell them, you know.
Yeah, that's sort of that sort of self attestation, and there's some level of making sure there's like a high quality, or whatever the term is, a healthy quality housing, but not having that be an infringement on people's like day to day. Oh, excellent. Thanks, Lacey. Lori, and then Aaron, and then Scott.
Thank you. Sorry, I'm going to take you back a little bit to the don't really go there, but the picture of the land area. And as we're talking about families, I thought I heard you say that on the north side of Pack Tower, there will be a childcare early learning program. If that's the case, would that be accessible to individuals with children who would be in one of these kind of services? Potentially. I mean, couldn't that be a recommendation?
I think the answer is yes, it can be a recommendation, but you also asked the question if it's accessible. So looking at John or Levi.
Accessibility could mean a lot of things. I mean, proximate, it's there. It's just on the other side of campus. In terms of enrollment, that the plan is for El Centro to be operating the daycare center on the north lot. So I would suspect that it's going to be similar to the programs that they run in other locations. And so it would be, I think, up to them in terms of making those connections.
Great. Well, I think that'd be wonderful. I mean, and just thinking about the use of space, if that were to be available, then that would free up some of the other buildings for other purposes. Okay, so then my suggestion, and I am not a gardener, but I know some of you in this meeting are, and I also know that for many people that is something that they find therapeutic, helpful, etc. And what made me think of it was when the individual was talking about cooking classes and healthy food. And so I just want to put on there, if you've got that green space, I don't know if you could have a garden that people could actually work in, do stuff in, but just to throw it out there.
Just the extent of historic preservation, control on the site, there are limitations on what can be done, and I know that the grounds specifically have site controls on them. But that being said, you know, to partner with parks, Seattle Parks, right across the street, I believe that we could make a recommendation that we should look to our surrounding areas where there are also maybe even more and better suited areas to till. So I think that would be a great recommendation.
Thank you, Lori, for those. So yeah, that access piece, and you talked about how to then maximize the best maximize the use of the quarters buildings, and sort of having also an emphasis on the nearby access, so that I don't think you're saying so there isn't a duplicative of services, but sort of benefiting off what is there and what's sort of being established. And then this, great addition of this sort of working garden. Okay, I'm going to jump around here. I know that there's a couple of hands, but I saw a couple of things go into the chat, and so I want to come back and forth between those two. Actually, Jim, you had shared something earlier in the context of Lacey talking about the inspections and sort of the having autonomy over the space. You said maybe adopt a model similar to what one needs to do, even if renting in the private market. How do you have the type of work that's more about a community standard for everyone, and not having like a treatment program? And Lacey, you said maybe more of a Section 8 inspection once a year as opposed to every month. So those are great ideas, something to ensure that sort of safe housing conditions and healthy housing conditions, but not have that overburden on any given individual. Okay, let's do Aaron, and then we'll come back.
Thanks. Hi, all. So I work at Legal Counsel for Youth and Children, and we provide legal services in a wide variety of areas. And one of our programs offers free legal aid to young people ages 12 to 24 who are experiencing or at risk of homelessness or housing instability. And one thing that we've learned through some focus groups is that civil legal aid is not something that a lot of folks maybe know what it is, because the providers who offer it don't explain it very well. We're not, community based a lot of the time. LCYC really tries to embed ourselves in the community, and this is a space that I could see having legal services clinics, not like a full-time, spot there, but even if it's just every couple of weeks, people could come in, appointment or not, and talk with a lawyer and just kind of screen for issues that the young person might not identify as a legal issue, but that when they dig in with a lawyer, they would identify it as one. And I can drop in the chat, just we have like a legal tool screening kit that we work with young people on to kind of say, what non-criminal issues that you might need help with. And I think it's a really good tool to just share as an example of, like, if there was a clinic, how a lot of times civil legal issues are perpetuating or, exacerbating the kind of housing instability issues that that young people are experiencing. So I think we would be very interested in talking more about that, because it seems like a great space to partner with young people.
Yeah, excellent. Thanks you, Erin. So yeah, the offering of that legal services, and I liked what you said, where there's some sort of relationship or network where there's the opportunity to access that, not even beyond when any individual is like kind of self-identifies that need, but being able to dig in and support, to a little bit more proactive. So I think that's an interesting way of how it could go about. So thanks, Erin. Scott Schubert.
Hey everyone. Thanks again for hosting this, and just wanted to kind of start by acknowledging all the great ideas. Like, I loved hearing how they kind of build off of one another, and just the lens and the scope that I kind of come with is as a housing provider. So when I'm thinking about this, I think about like the models and what would work within the spaces, and knowing some of the staffing challenges and things like that. So I just wanted to provide some of that context for where I view this, or the lens that I look at when I think about this. So I think it was Emily had talked about having some kind of peer resident advocate kind of housing. And it got me thinking about, if you did some sort of transitional type housing, with I think 20 or 10 to 20 units at building 10, making those other ones potentially, or some of those, kind of where the peer advocate could live and stay. So it separates them enough from the building, but that also ensures potentially a more of a 24-hour kind of model, and also gives youth and young adults experience in this field and this work, because one thing that we experience within housing is a lot of crisis, and things that take place after hours. So I also want to make sure it's a really safe place for so many people, and the other kind of thing is just I think we talked about this last meeting as a hub. So not just a King County centric housing, but maybe someone, in Spokane, Bridget, really is interested in coming to Seattle. We have a space for them, and it's not just King County kind of focus, but we can, have some money in the budget to, do a Greyhound bus, and then do an Uber to their new place. So I think that provides an opportunity too for just funding, looking at what Frank Chop wants to do with this. So I think that's something to really look at. I would also kind of just encourage us to think about how do we utilize kind of all of the buildings to provide safety across the board. And so I think that's something that is really important. And we also want to make sure that young adults are going to be highly successful in this model. So so I think we really need to focus on a robust both staffing structure, but also a robust kind of safety mechanism.
Thanks, Scott. So yeah, those two things that there's like three things there, and then I saw Emily, your hand shoot up as Scott was referencing the peer advocate piece. So I'm going to go to you next, just to keep that thread. But yeah, so you talked about yeah, like they said, sort of robust staffing structure. So in order to support the longevity of a lot of these things, making sure that those investments are there for staff people to support that. And we'll have Emily, you share here in a bit, but seeming like there's an importance in the sort of separation and privacy between some of those resident advocates and the peers that are also living on campus. And then you talked about how to think about the use of all the buildings in this sort of way that in general they're supporting safety. So thank you, Scott, for that. Emily, did you want to add on to that resident peer? You jumped right up as Scott was talking about that.
Yeah, because I there's just so much to the program I'm in and the place I'm staying that everyone's saying that I didn't think. Like I was like, oh, we'll get to that. And I'm like, okay, I need to make sure I say this. But just part of that whole thing, it's called Pfeiffer House. And it's like I said, a Victorian style house. I said a lot about it already, but just things that I didn't say. So there are I know this would be different for Pack Tower, but there are shared tasks that the RA helps assign, makes sure it's fair, helps people if they need it, but it's only because we don't have maintenance. So we take out the trash. Someone's in charge bi-monthly to take out the trash each time. There's the hallways, so we'll make sure that the hallway is clear, laundry rooms, facilities on site. So make sure that that's clear. Each one has, lawn care, mowing, each person has their assigned stuff and, we all help each other. It's a sense of community. There's RA, I just started RA check-ins with them. So that's something that's similar. It's just whatever else their other caseworkers aren't covering, just some scheduled set times. Cause I've noticed there was weeks and I just wouldn't see these residents just cause in scheduling differences. And then transportation, it helps because there's no real thing on transportation for that. So I am able to give them a ride if they need to. There's not really, it's I take on that liability if needed. Segueing into that, this position helps me myself. So whoever the peer would be in boundary setting, leadership, mentorship. So it helps this position as well. And then more than one peer, definitely. I would say ratio no more to 6. I would say 4 households, apartments, whatever's per peer, because then that would be a lot. And that is it. Sorry, that was a lot.
No, don't apologize. That's excellent. This could have been a meeting where we were all just twiddling our thumbs. So excellent. Thank you, Emily, for those additions. I see Bridget. You've been very patiently waiting. Thank you for that, Bridget. Go ahead.
Well, and I wasn't here for the last meeting, and this might have been things that came out the last meeting. So I guess my question is, are we really just focused on 18 and older, or are we focused on the younger folks as well? Or can we be?
The answer is yes. We're focused on younger folks as well. And in fact, one of the things that came out was that there are certain gaps when thinking about particular age groups. So if you want to speak to what those, I think if you want to mention specifically those age groups and those gaps will be actually very helpful to us. And I think, Marissa, you were talking about that a little bit last meeting as well. Sort of age appropriate, diligent appropriate.
I don't think Spokane is alone in the fact that there is really very few, actually, I will say we have no beds for the under 18 who are exiting, especially from behavioral health treatment, but any of the systems of care that are just specific. I mean, really what we have are shelters which are intended for homeless young people or young people experiencing homelessness. And now all of a sudden they're getting exited and their parents aren't showing up and picking them up. And there is no place for them besides a night by night shelter, essentially, which is not an appropriate place. For the 18 and up, and not that I'm trying to compete but in contrast, there are places that they can go for housing for a soft landing that isn't necessarily a shelter. For the under 18, there is nothing. And I don't know if there was conversations about including perhaps an under 18. It sounds like everything we're talking about here is really focused on the 18 and older. And we all know the under 18 really does pose some huge challenges. And going back to, I think it was Lacey who was really concerned about the family piece. Our local maternity group home is now the last maternity group home in this state that can take under 18 youth that are pregnant or parenting. And we're now getting them from Seattle. So I'm gonna put a thing out there, my hat in my thing in the bucket, whatever you want to call it. I would advocate for someplace for the under 18 families as well. And that's all I got.
Thank you, Bridget. Yeah. Yes, to underscore the breadth is on the table, and so noted. And I think that's a important piece. And again, sort of that intersection, even with some of the things, for example, like you're talking about, Lacey, for folks who are parents. Lacey, your hand is up next. So speaking of which,
one second, my internet's been so bad. That's why you probably keep hearing recording in progress, because I keep popping in and out. I was just thinking, like, when I've been in like programs and stuff, what has really helped me, because I don't drive, is like maybe weekly transportation to a big local grocery store that everyone agrees on. This was on Sunday for us, so it was an easy day. Whoever wanted to go, they would sign up or talk to their case manager, and there would be a van, and we go, and the case manager was really nice. She'd be like, okay, how long do you think you'll be? And if someone else wanted to go somewhere else, she would drive them to a different grocery store. And it was great. I would just be like an hour, and it was so much easier than having to take a bus with a kid and a stroller and just lugging those groceries back. I know there is like delivery for groceries, but then you also have to pay the extra fees. So, and then also WIC, you have to go to the grocery store to use a WIC card. So that would be nice if there was something like that weekly. And I know in that area, there's not that many grocery stores. So if you could take like a trip, I don't know, I'm thinking Renton, I guess, has a Walmart. It's South Seattle, maybe the Apple Market. I don't even know if that's there anymore. But yeah, so that's just kind of what I was thinking.
That's a good point, Lacey. Yeah, thanks for sharing that and that example that you're talking about, because I saw some nodding heads. From my understanding of the area, there isn't a ton of options as it relates to grocery stores. And so there's this balance of like the cooking classes and the sort of food on site. But then, for exactly like you said, for folks that are have WIC, you need to use it at a grocery store. And so that would require going beyond something that is easily accessible. So that's a good point, and it's a good point, especially in the context of this particular site's location. Jim, on that point, said, yeah, there's the Red Apple on Beacon Hill. Costco is close, but there's a great idea for a community drive to the stores, and like you said, identifying what that would be. So, Emily.
I love that idea. It's like it's given a sense of belonging too with all the community stuff. Going back to something that Bridget had said, just like for the need of having an under 18, like if that's something that we can work around with the consent and parental consent and all that, like maybe there could be a wing or its own allotted spaces for somehow working that out, where there's youth under 18. Maybe there's more than one. Maybe if it's a sibling situation going on, just something like that. Maybe that's a caveat that we can add, where of course we can't, of course it wouldn't be intertwined with over 18 and 18, because that's something that just wouldn't be the safest for everyone involved. But like maybe just having a separate, like, and having their own peer navigators and all that stuff.
Great. Yeah, thanks, Emily. So let's do a little pause. I'm looking at this. Melody has been gliding all over the screen, her cursor and notes, and Melody, if you want to jump in here as well. But we've got I've kind of zoomed out in the way the note taking was looking. I was thinking of organizing this in a particular way, but we just jumped in, which is great. So we can edit this before we get shared out as sort of like a larger single space, and maybe some groupings would be a good thing we could do, Melody, for themes. And I know you've started to do that already, I could tell. So actually, yeah, Melody, do you want to speak a little bit to what we've heard so far and some of the groupings that you're seeing and
Yeah.
themes?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think a big theme that we're hearing repeated is like separate but equal separate programming for folks under 18, especially folks with families, whether it be an entire wing or a separate building or some dedicated space for folks in that particular situation. And then especially for youth exiting systems. We're also seeing an interest in some longer term housing options, with also the ability for some of those longer term options to have the space be have folks have autonomy over the space, or some semblance of autonomy, being able to do things like dim the lights and not have to worry about weekly inspections. Considering different types of program models that maybe invest in the long-term financial stability of the tenants, being able to give tenants access to things like a working garden, access to healthy food and cooking classes, access to other services on campus, having some expectation of shared living responsibilities, right? And maybe that looks different between program types, right? But something developmentally appropriate for sure. I also heard, even though we were, talking about models, a lot of really great ideas have come up for on-campus services as well, including mental health services, especially for longer term care, childcare, especially for young parents. As we all know, attaining childcare is a huge barrier to things like employment and stability. Having resident advocates, especially peers, and maybe those peers look different for the under 18 group. Again, cooking classes, legal services, financial planning, free gym exercise, and access to vans or some sort of transportation so that folks can get on and off campus easily. Oh, and an art room.
In real time.
Love it.
Thanks, Melody. Yeah, I think this is looking pretty excellent, and I do love. I'm going to quote you again, Jim. I think you said something like the spaghetti on the wall or something one time, and this is that. I think we'll do our work here to start to organize some of these, so we can, especially as we have the next meeting and we come back to this, to see some of these threads that are around like the idea of like personal. I don't necessarily want to say ownership. We're talking about autonomy, but like personal autonomy, like personalization, and sort of like healthy living standards. And I think Scott's point is important too, of like, what are the systems that need to be in place to sustain these things, whether it's through staffing, some of the ideas that Emily talked about with like the peer resident shared living responsibilities, but then not overly burden folks as well. But so yeah, I think this is good. I see a couple other hands, so let's keep that going if there's reactions as we've looked through what we've heard so far. So let's have Lacey, Lori, and then Jim.
Okay, I have a couple things to throw out there. How do we want, like, well, one, if there's children, what about a playground on site? This is like Seattle, so I know it's like not the best area surrounding. So I don't know if people want to walk their kids down to another playground. So maybe a playground on site. And then a couple more things is mail. Do we want mail to be like locked and secure? Like, how do we want the mailboxes? And if people ride bikes, where can those be? I was thinking about, do we want cameras just in case of any problems? And parking, where are people going to park if they drive?
Awesome. So playground, how to set up mail services and what mail looks like, and then parking, and Emily shared guest parking as well. So let's capture those two also, Melody. Excuse me. Oh, and bikes. Thank you, Marissa. Lori, and then Jim.
Thank you. I'm just so impressed, Lacey, that you have that mind for all the details. It's like you need to be part of that group that actually makes sure this is executed. The suggestion that came to my mind, or thought that came to my mind, again, thinking about the entirety of that Pack Tower area and thinking about the just neighborhood and the likelihood that there are senior programs, that there's a thought about intergenerational. So what really made me think of it was how do you get to the grocery store type of thing? And I know that many assisted living type programs have that type of thing where they're taking folks, and I don't know, there might be a lot of groans about intergenerational. It seems like for a variety of reasons that could be a positive element to bring into it. So I just recommend thinking about looking at ways to partner with older generations too.
Yeah, interesting. Thanks, Lori. Yeah, about that relationship with other generations. Jim.
Yeah, thanks. I too want to say how awesome this discussion is. And this thing is going to come alive. So you'll remember back when we planted all these seeds. So a couple things. One, we've talked about different purposes of, anyway, I think a multi-purpose room that could serve as an art class or an art room one night and something else. But think about one thing how it's designed. And I just think that plus I think a couple meeting rooms. So Aaron made me think of this. LCYC or legal advocacy, they might not need to be there all day, every day, but what if there was a couple rooms that they reserved so that they were there on Mondays from 5 to 8, and the next night it was physical health or something, like just that people, so that you could have a dynamic programming coming in. But also that maybe the residents would say, hey, we want a peer group to talk about XYZ. And so we're going to sign up for that. So multi-purpose meeting rooms. And then the people that know me know I've got a 40-year history of beating dead horses. So I'm going to do it again. I'd really like to capture the discharge from inpatient. We do know that those are the highest percentage of young people who are homeless within 6 to 12 months coming out of a system of care. And that number is actually growing. It was 2/3, and now it's up to like 75% of the young people coming out of foster care, juvenile justice, or inpatient treatment. 75% of those who are homeless in 12 months are coming from inpatient, which again, it breaks my heart that they went to get help and then they're discharged to a drop-in center or an emergency shelter. So thank you, Ishmael.
Thank you, Jim. And yeah, and that's interesting, sort of like rotating flexible, going back to the office thing, rotating flexible space that either is like deliberately programmed on some days and some schedule, and also an opportunity for residents to reserve it for some purpose. Bridget.
It really sounds like, and the only thing that I have that I can even make an analogy to is this is almost like a college campus. And providing those types of services, and I think historically colleges and university campuses with the dorms have always been the #1 transitional housing program in this country for anybody at all, And I think it's a great idea just because you are mixed in with your peers. And we all know the peers are absolutely essential for young people to complete their development or continue their development. And and the only other thing that I'm not seeing under the office-based services and clinics is perhaps a medical clinic for physical health. And especially, and I'm going to go back to my under 18s, their difficulty accessing a lot of medical care, even though the mature minor doctrine was passed this past year, it's still going to take a while for it to filter out to all the medical care providers across the state. And looking at this as a model that might be, depending upon the cost, something that is replicable across the state. Kudos to Scott for talking about these young people, they travel back and forth. And so have that sort of a consistency across the state, and they know what they're going to get, hopefully, regardless of where they are in the state. That consistent care and that respect and that non-judgment and all that goes with this programming. I think that's all I got to say.
Excellent. Thank you, Bridget.
Ishmael,
Oh yeah, who is that?
this is Erin. Sorry, as the tech host here behind the scenes, I don't think it allows me to actually raise my hand.
I was going to ask if this icon was you raising your hand. I am sorry. Yes, go ahead, Erin.
No, it's all right. I'm here mostly behind the scenes and just listening and appreciating what everyone has had to say so far. But I think it just has all made me really excited to sort of underscore the value of this and the unique aspects of this location. So I live in the neighborhood. I worked in that building. I feel familiar about the space as well. And I just wanted to say that things like parking, like, yes, there is parking on site, but I think we're going to have to think about what it would mean to have residents parking there regularly, because right now it's designated for the clinic that's on site and for the folks that work in the building. So all of this I want to also make about flipping everything folks are saying into recommendations. So that's a strong recommendation from me to think about parking. Bike space too, someone mentioned, there's an awesome bike space in the basement of the building for employees that work on site. It gets me excited thinking about if that could be used also for residents or what other needs might need to be addressed. So a recommendation to look at that. Someone mentioned a playground, major +1 to having a playground on the campus. That would be so awesome. But there's also that beautiful green space that's been renovated just down the hillside. So just thinking expansively about what would we want to recommend, something beautiful there that's special and carved out for residents could be really nice too. And then just again to repeat myself, overall, how can we think about framing these things as recommendations? I just get really excited about capturing all of that beyond just the nitty-gritty of individual desires. So thanks, everybody.
Yeah. Thanks so much, Erin. Yeah, my apologies for not getting your hand from the chat, but and I appreciate you talking with someone who's lived in the neighborhood and you said worked in the building and yeah, it's like we're saying, and Laura, you mentioned this point around Lacey up, you're thinking about those detail level things that maybe you don't always think about, but that's really a lot of those day-to-day functions. And I think something that's been really exciting, to echo what you were saying, Erin, especially taking from the spaghetti on the wall here and maybe something we can bring to the next conversation, is starting to think about how these things work together and how the gears have to be connected for all of this to work out. And so it's interesting to start to think, it's okay, we're throwing out ideas, an art room, a garden, etc. But then it's if that's here and it's related to how the for under 18, and then we have you start to paint the picture, which I think is something that there's a lot here that can get us in that direction. So love everyone for the conversation so far. I see Lacey, and then I'll go into the chat, and then we'll just do a recap here in a second. Go ahead, Lacey.
I'm just coming up with a bunch of them now. Okay, stroller parking. I don't know if there would be a spot for strollers. I hate bringing my stroller up the stairs, especially pregnant. And I have a double stroller for my groceries. And then I was just wondering, what about free Wi-Fi across the building? Will that be accessible for people going to school, and just like Wi-Fi is so important nowadays? I was just thinking about this, maybe, I don't know, but you know, if they're meeting with like a case manager and stuff, you know, and they're getting their goals met, and they're doing, you know, going along and getting their life together and stuff, maybe giving them like, I know we used to do this at the Union Gospel Mission. They used to have a boutique with like essentials. And if we could give like fake little, you know, fake money and be like, here, you know, so you can go get your toilet paper at the boutique, go get some new clothes, or just like essentials you may need, laundry soap. I think that would be cool to have like a little boutique in there. And then what else was I thinking? Oh, if possibly the food bank could come on site like once a month, every other week. And another thing that another program I was in that they did was, I don't know, weekly, monthly, maybe like, I don't know how many people are going to be there, but a case manager takes like 2 people from the place, or 2 families, and they tell them like, look, this is what we got from the food bank, and you guys create a budget and let's do a big family meal. That was kind of something that I did through New Phoebe House. I lived in a house full of women, and once a week we would partner with someone and we would go look in the pantry and see, okay, we got this. Now, what do we want to make out of this? We'd make a whole recipe, including proteins, fruits, vegetables, whatever. And then we bring it to the case manager and have her look it over and yes or no, and, you know, just fixing all that up.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you, Lacey. Yeah. So a ton of great ideas. And again, I don't want to like over I'm gonna take Jim's title of like beating a dead horse, but yeah, that like level, the way that you talked about it earlier, Lori, or sorry, it was either Lori or Bridget, sorry, my apologies, of like campus. Obviously this is a campus, but the idea of like sort of like that college campus towards that transitional. So you have these levels of detail. So seeing stuff in the chat as well, like a phone, like access to a phone line if folks don't have. I think Mayana, you shared that in the chat. Those are things that I think are. I would feel confident that that's part of the space, but there is a way to think about it in the sense of like these shared amenities that folks have the access to in some configurations or another. So so great. I mean, so let me just go through a couple of things that were in the chat here as well. I know yeah, I was going to make that comment earlier as well around physical health. There is physical health care in the PAC Tower right now. I would recommend folks again, and maybe Aaron, when you send out the packet or when we send out whatever comes out of this meeting in advance next meeting, we can add that again just so that folks can be seeing that. I know that John put together that great list of existing tenants, and I think there's probably several things here that that sort of reinforce what's there, support what's there, complements what's there, and identifies things that are not currently in the building as well. And then, yeah, there was some of these other details and specifics, mini library, pets or opportunity for pets, community phone, classroom kind of setting or testing center, the free health, particularly essentials, health essentials. Thank you, Aaron. Threw it in there already. Awesome. Love that. And some of these other sort of shared access and amenities. So this is really great. This is excellent. I think I have some thoughts about how we might proceed in these next meetings, and so we'll try and figure that out. But I think it would be good to do some of these groupings, start to identify, perhaps, I'm just throwing this out there so people can feel free to push back, but start to identify some of those services that currently exist in the building and in the campus or in the tower. some of those services that are nearby and how these all start to interplay. And so how the campus itself starts to be programmed with those things in mind. There's a variety of ways that we can do that and have those conversations. I know that we've got a little bit more time here. This was the bulk of what we wanted to do today, but I just want to give an opportunity in case there's something critical that we haven't talked about yet, whether it's an idea or it's a question that might help us set up for next time. Happy to hear it. And I don't know, Jim, or if there's anything else that you want to poke on folks to or probe folks to go down. But this last little bit here is just a little bit open as far as what folks feel like they might need to share or say or ask, especially as we're going into the next meetings. So I called this roundtable on the agenda. Just sort of like any kind of last words or anything else that we want to share as we're going around, whether it's related to the recommendations or this process or what we're hoping happens next. Yeah, Marissa.
Yeah, I've really been enjoying listening. And I guess when I looked at the housing models topic, I appreciated the comments from Scott and Bridget and Jim and others earlier, sort of touching on, like, if you bring in, under 18s, right, that's going to look different. If you bring in the discharge from inpatient, that's going to look different. And so I wonder if some of the recommendations are maybe to recognize those differentiations between the populations that could be in these spaces, and almost like an assisted, like different levels of assisted living programs to meet the needs of the tenants, the residents, whatever words we're going to use, for the spaces, so that there can be that level of additional service, support, care based on the circumstances of the person. But then also maybe that creates some transitional flow between spaces for what have you, or calling out the family supports as well, right? Like there could be some different things that become tailored to certain buildings, if that makes sense. That's just somewhere that my brain went in listening to the comments. So I just wanted to call out, like, we may end up with some different models actually in the same, campus.
Yeah, I'd like to respond. I think that's really great insight and direction, and also as a way to maybe organize the report in some ways and the recommendations. I do think one of the things we do want to consider is what level of acuity, and we had some of these conversations in earlier groups, what level of acuity might this campus be able to manage without getting noticed as the sore thumb from the other, like people go to work there, and do they want ambulances coming in and out? And so I think that still is part of the discussion. And so I appreciate that a lot. And I wanted to make sure we had this discussion that didn't have those constrictions first and foremost, but rather, what does the community need? What do young people need? And then we know that conversation about, well, that won't work and this won't. We know there's plenty of time for that. But I really appreciate your comment, and mostly how you framed it, that it wasn't a, you can't do that. It was, be thoughtful about how we do all of this at the same place. So I really wanted to underscore and thank you for that.
I too want to appreciate all that's been shared. My mind is abuzz with all of the detail, and you can't get that detail from a top-down approach. You have to really hear from people who live it, because they're the ones that know and can anticipate the absence of something. One thing to make sure that everyone sort of is able to embrace as well is the notion that we have not had residents on this campus for decades. It has not been the use. And if you look at what happens today, there's a busy time during the day, folks come in, use the campus, and a lot of community members don't come in because they don't have business there. And these wrought iron gates wrap the whole campus. And it's not a very open and friendly facade, I think, for people to approach. So what we're talking about in terms of both the affordable housing that's going to be developed on the north lot, as well as looking at residential use in the quarters building, is a huge shift. It's a gigantic shift. And the current level of infrastructure to handle this population coming doesn't exist today, or it exists in small pieces. And so this is the opportunity now, before one shovel has hit the dirt, if you will, to really be anticipating and thinking about how the campus can be done in an integrated fashion, and it takes care of as much as it can. So when you look at the spectrum of all that's available, because there's a lot of holes in the system, not everything is going to be easily solved in this particular setting, but many will. And I think finding the right balance of those different things to create the solution will require this kind of level of detail and thinking through. So I just applaud everyone for contributing in such an open way.
Yeah, thank you, John. Yeah, that's an important reality of both like how significant this is and how significant it will be, to share that. I'm going to put a plug in, as you were saying this now, John. I was thinking this for myself, absolutely. But yeah, I think folks should take the advantage and opportunity to tour the campus and the site, to also internalize some of these things, for example, that John is saying. I know, Jim, you put that out there earlier. Be a great idea. Also, I want people to know this last piece, we're also capturing notes. It's also happening. Melody's also flying around with sticky notes. Trust us, it's happening. We'll make sure to share out and let people see that. Any other, yeah, there you go. Melody wants you to know. Yeah, Melody wants you to know. Thank you. Any other thoughts, reactions? Oh, I see Mercy said when you had a group visit there, one person was very focused on looking for bathrooms. So yeah, you start to just like feel these things really.
Well, and also just the random renovations that happened over time that removed things like showers and bathtubs. You start looking for those missing things when thinking about a residential space.
That's a really good point.
Yeah, I mean, that's what I had asked in the chat. Mayana had made a quick comment about, are these single rooms? And I was really interested in recommendations both on, single rooms and single bathrooms, and sort of the nature of living, not in addition to the enrichment side, but like just that day-to-day nitty-gritty. Do you want just a few people? That is another area where I think recommendations would be really cool to hear.
Apologies for missing that earlier, Don. I just scrolled up and I did see it now. You were asking off the back of Mayana mentioning that as well. I don't know, Leave, if you want to speak to that. I know you talked to the last meeting around the building, so this question of if there's single rooms, and I think Jim would say, well, recommendations for everything, but yeah, talk a little bit about the configurations of how things could be. Is that right? Oh, go ahead, Don.
I'm working with Levi. I'm saying it would be interesting to hear what the rest of the group has. It would be better to hear what people want. That's what I think that would be so great to add to this conversation.
Thank you. So yes, we will make note of that to have that be a particular part and thread in the conversation. Thank you, Don. Okay. Let's see. I was gonna go click. Computer is moving slow. So, oh, Marissa, go ahead. Sorry, I missed that.
Sorry, I wanted to touch on what Don said, because I would really love, I think, the lived experiences group to tease out what feels safe. I mean, certainly I had lots of different living configurations going through the college years, right? And so, and now as a homeowner, and once I became an adult, the idea of having roommates was not something that appealed to me necessarily. And so that is also one of the things where I wonder where maybe some of these buildings look different, where you have your own bathroom and a communal kitchen, right? Like those are, they're different ways where not every space needs its own kitchen necessarily.
Go ahead, Emily.
I completely agree with that. Just like part of, and I am trying to like see which experience would be most prevalent, but I think there was some residents that were not ready for their own apartment, so to speak, and lost the apartment very quickly due to not being able to keep it clean, or just not being too overwhelmed with the amount of space, because you know they're used, maybe they came from just having, well, specifically in this instance, this person had a tent for a year, and then all of a sudden had an apartment with a whole bathroom, a laundry facilities, all that. And so, yeah, I think that's a really good idea, just having like based on like the capabilities, or just even like what their mental capacity is. Like I don't like to, like I personally would love to not have a kitchen because I don't use it. You know, it's another space to clean. So yeah, that's a good option. That's a good thing.
Yeah, and it's like what you were saying, Marissa, around sort of the different levels of assisted living, and thinking about how those things support each other. And it goes back to Jim's question of what ultimately might then be sort of that, this is not my favorite way to talk about, like target population and sort of high acuity. And you think about the ways these buildings, and Scott, before he jumped off, talked about all the buildings should be sort of geared towards the safety. And then so you think about these different levels of assisted living and service, how do those things work together, that maybe, you know, I don't know, these quarters are sharing a kitchen, but there's private bathrooms, et cetera, as exactly what people were just talking about. So it's feeling like the group is in this place where we're getting, you know, everything was thrown on and now you're starting to like move things. And it's like, well, does that actually work together? And some of these key questions that are coming up as I'm hearing this around sort of that, start to key in maybe a little bit on what populations are wanted to focus on, and then how the relationships of that all play out. Anything else as we start to wrap? This has been excellent, by the way. I super appreciate everyone for the conversation and participation. Okay. I want to just say, thank you again to folks. The next meeting is in 2 weeks from today. So I think that's October 13th. And we'll be sure to reach out ahead of time with stuff. We'll try, and Erin's been already great in doing that in real time, sharing the list of partners. And I saw that there was this conversation just there at the end. Jim is talking about gaining some kind of critical mass for a tour, and then scheduling around that. So if you're interested, you should definitely reach out to Jim, and he shared his email in the chat there. But yeah, if there isn't anything else, we'll give folks a little bit of time back from what we had. We had a little bit of flexibility in our timing here on the agenda. So I thought this was wonderful. I don't know, Jim or John, if anyone wants to say any kind of final words here, but otherwise, yeah, I appreciate folks so much. Excellent. Well, thank you. We'll see you next time. Hope you enjoy the rest of your day. Appreciate y'all.